I have a question about this because I know there are certain compounds that help your body utilize cortisol better, and they seem to lower cortisol, if you will.
Adaptogens,
like ashwagandha is an example.
Licorice root.
Would ashwagandha be something that you wouldn't want to use if you weren't producing a lot of cortisol? Let's say you're in that stage 3, stage 4. Is it more appropriate for stage 1, or are adaptogens appropriate throughout that whole cycle because they help balance things out?
Well, adaptogens spare cortisol.
Okay.
Like if you take licorice root as one of the herbs I use with pregnenolone, which is the precursor to cortisol. So you get, it goes from cholesterol to progesterone to pregnenolone. Then you get what's called pregnenolone steal. And there's a pathway. Pregnenolone is pulled out of the sex hormone pathway by the adrenals to manufacture glucocorticoids. So that's why as you get more and more stressed, your body cannot manufacture both sex hormones effectively and cortisol effectively. But since cortisol is a survival hormone, adrenaline, cortisol, and insulin are your 3 hormones you must have or you'll die. The rest of them are secondary. So pregnenolone steal is the name of the pathway where pregnenolone is stolen on its way to becoming a sex hormone and diverted to the adrenals to make the glucocorticoid stress hormones. So if your stress levels are high enough that your body does not have the resources to manufacture the stress hormones and the sex hormones, your sexual performance and your recovery ability starts dropping and dropping because you're driving the cortisol fight or flight pathway so strongly. And the body says, if you're that stressed, it's not a good time to be reproducing children anyhow. So it tries to protect you from doing what Americans do all day long.
And so, and adaptogens spare that?
So adaptogens generally spare cortisol. So for example, if I'm working with someone that's got adrenal exhaustion, I might have them take licorice root because it makes, it allows the body to use less cortisol. So the same amount of cortisol lasts longer in the blood. It's like it extends its shelf life as a metaphor. So you can help people feel better than they normally would, because if the body uses X amount of cortisol per unit of time, now with the adaptogen, they have that X amount of cortisol per a longer unit of time before they go into withdrawal type experiences. But if you use adaptogens when you're high cortisol, it'll make lots of cortisol stay in the system too long, which would cause a tremendous increase in the likelihood of you not getting into deep restorative sleep. You'd be one of these person that's kind of tired and wired and lays in bed waiting to fall asleep, and then you finally fall asleep and you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you can tell it's really far down the line when you wake up sweating. And then you usually can't get ever deep, and all of a sudden right about 5 minutes before the alarm goes off, you're having a deep sleep, and you really get pissed off when you got to get up because you're like, finally, I just fell asleep. So that's what happens when people are using adaptogens while they're high cortisol, because they're they don't know how to manage themselves or the environment.
Yeah, the reason why I was asking is I love, for me personally, when I take anything, and I'm sensitive to caffeine, so I don't take as much as the average person. It only takes me 150 to 200 milligrams, and I'm buzzed. I'm wired. Whereas other people, 300, 400 is what they'll end up with, or even higher.
Yeah.
But I notice when I take caffeine with theanine, and if I combine it with ashwagandha, I get a much smoother ride. I don't get that super high peak in that drop. So that's why I was asking how the ashwagandha or how the adaptogen will help, or maybe not help.
Well, like I say, if you've got too much cortisol in you, it'll magnify that experience because it'll prolong the shelf life of the cortisol in your bloodstream. That's my experience of it, having looked into this and tested lots of these things. But there is a fair bit of individuality. Just like in one family, if you look at Roger Williams' book, Biochemical Individuality by Roger Williams, he shows, for example, there's 19 different types of stomachs you find in people. He showed that within one family, the same parent, from the same parents, there can be a 1,000-fold difference in the ability for the liver to clear any toxin, such as alcohol. So what I'm saying is you and me could be twin brothers, but you could have a very different reaction to caffeine than me. I'm like you. Once I cleaned myself up, got off of it for a good year or two and didn't touch it while I got healed, I found that if I drink more than one shot of espresso a day that I get addicted. So I make it a habit to like leave maybe a third or a little bit and pour it down the sink. So I stay under that threshold. But a typical espresso shot out of a standard machine is 40 to 70 milligrams of caffeine. So if you did a triple shot espresso and filled the rest of the cup with hot water, that would still only be about 210 milligrams of caffeine. A Starbucks drip coffee at 8 ounces, 350 milligrams of caffeine. So here's the point I'm making. A person who wants to reduce caffeine is far better to go to an Americano and put a shot or two of espresso and add hot water. One, the flavor richness is even better. Two, the shorter the exposure time to the water, the less caffeine you get and the less toxins you pick up. So I tell people always use organic coffee because it's one of the most heavily sprayed crops in the world, and you're extracting toxins out of it with hot water and under pressure with an espresso machine. But if you use a couple of shots of espresso, chase it up with water, and make it the size you would normally like a coffee, you're going to get far less caffeine and you get less toxic exposure. The longer the water's exposed to the bean, like drip coffee can be exposed to the beans for 5, 6, 7 minutes, right? So you're leaching lots more caffeine out of it, and it's more drying to your body because you're bringing a lot of volume in.
That's why the cold brew is so much stronger in caffeine. They leave it there to brew for overnight, and it just absorbs more or takes out more of the caffeine.
Yeah.
Do you find you've been